Hello Year 5 students. In today's video, I am going to summarize our lesson in week 4. So if you remember during the first activity, I asked you to read information on page 10 to 11, which is all about pollination and the ways by which the flowers are pollinated. Remember, as I mentioned again and again, when you read a book or when you watch a video, you are actually doing some research activities. Okay? And when we do research, we have to collect information or concepts. Okay? And this information, we need to process and make connections so that we'll be able to understand what we read or what we watched. So going back, so I ask you to read page 10 and 11 about pollination and the ways by which flowers are pollinated, which are the pollination by wind and pollination by insects. Okay, again, generally and basically, pollination is simply the movement of the pollen from the male part of the flower to the stigma, which is the female part of the flower. So just the movement is called pollination. And how does it move? By means of insect or by means of wind. Okay, so in order to process the information, I ask you to outline the information in a chart uh, by understanding or by outlining the different adaptations of flowering plants in terms of petals, scent, nectar, and others. So all this information can be completed if you have read pages 10 to 11. So I would like to give you an example of what Zimal did in this activity. So what Zimal did, she outlined, okay, the information and put them in a chart. Okay, if you notice, these are how the information look like. And in order to understand that, you'll be able to see a comparison between the adaptation of flowers pollinated by insect and flowers pollinated by wind. Okay, in terms of petals. So if you notice, flowers that are pollinated by insects, their petals are big and bright colors. Why? Because they need to attract insects like insects, or we call them pollinators. We need to they need to attract insects or pollinators in order to carry the pollen from the anther to the stigma. Whereby those flowers that are pollinated by wind, they don't need big petals. They only need small petals and dull color of petals. Why? Because small petals can help the flowers to be easily carried away by the wind. Okay, if it's big petal, the wind will not be able to blow them away. Okay, so another adaptation is scent or the smell of the flower. Those flowers that are pollinated by insects, generally they have good smell or scent because the scent can attract insect to come and then perch or sit on the flower. Whereby those that are pollinated by wind, they don't need scent because insects do not come to visit them to collect nectar or to collect pollen. As I said, they are pollinated by winds. Okay, so other adaptations of flowers pollinated by insect is nectar. Nectar is the food of the insect, so that's why insects go and visit the flower because they need to feed from the nectar. And in the process, the insects get the pollen by sticking the pollen into their leg so that it can be moved to the stigma of the flower. But in the flowers pollinated by wind, the flowers do not have nectar. Other characteristics of flowers pollinated by insect, they have mark on their petals, okay, where the insects take the nectar. While the flowers pollinated by wind, their adaptation is having light pollen grains that can be easily blown by the wind. So that's how you collect information. So after reading page 10 to 11, it will only be it will only be significant for you and or you can be able to make sense of what you read if you know how to outline the information inside. So in that way here you'll be able to make a comparison why there are some flowers that are pollinated by insects and how they adapt in such kind of process, whereby you also identify the adaptations of those flowers that are pollinated by wind. Okay. We also had an activity to develop your scientific skills of identifying and classifying. If you remember, think like a scientist one. We've conducted this activity, but as I told you, since it is very limited for you to move outside, you cannot move outside due to our situation. I didn't ask you to go to the school ground or local community to collect flowers, okay? But instead, what we've done is we watched these two videos. In these two videos, pollination by insects and pollination by wind, the videos provided us with a variety of flowers that are pollinated by uh, insect and also pollinated by wind. Okay, so pollination by insects, we have flowers such as flower of tomato, brinjal, and also pepper, squash, and so many more. Okay, so whereby we also observe through the video the flowers that are pollinated by wind, for example, birch, chestnut, maize, grains, wheat, cereal, so many more. Okay, but of course, in order to focus particularly on pollination, we only draw and identify or label the parts of the flower that are only involved in pollination, and these are the pollen, stigma, and anther. Okay, so we also sort them or grouped the flowers according to how they are pollinated. So some of them are pollinated by insects and some of them are pollinated by wind. Okay, so let us see if we have some examples over here which you've done. Okay, so this is not the one. I've seen some of you who have already actually I think it's on another page. So anyway, you have it in your notebook. So you have sorted them out, grouped the flowers according to how they are pollinated. Okay. So we also had an activity where we did a research activity again. When you read your book, page 12, um, it's all about why must flowers be pollinated. So after learning about pollination, we tried to reflect on what is reproduction and what are the processes involved in the reproduction of plants. So in a video that I shared with you, there are three processes that are involved in reproduction in plants. The first one is pollination, and then the fertilization, and also the germination, which will be our next lesson. So pollination, we learned that pollination is the movement of pollen from the anther to the stigma, just the movement, okay? But it does not stop there. So when the pollen reaches the stigma, it meets the egg, okay? The egg. Now, when the pollen and the egg combines in the stigma, okay? That is what you call fertilization. Why is it called fertilization? It's because when they combine, they form into a seed. Okay? When the seed grows, the stamens of the flower die, the petals die. Okay? This seed will be in the ovary. When the ovary grows, it becomes the fruit. Okay? So fruit like durian, like apple, like oranges, these are the fruits with seeds. Tomato is also a vegetable fruit. Okay? And grapes, those are fruits that have seeds inside. So when you take the fruits there, you'll see that the seeds are inside. So these seeds, after eating, where do you take the seed? You throw them away, right? So these seeds are dispersed or spread into different areas so that they can regrow into another plant. So why must flowers be pollinated? Yes, it is important that flowers be pollinated, because if there's no pollination, then fertilization will not take place. So they are two very important processes, pollination and fertilization. We will continue learning our activity next week. Okay. Um, we will start learning about 1.3, and in the meantime, if you want to know more, this is in Schoology page. You can watch the video again, what is fertilization, so that you'll be able to further understand in detail the process of fertilization in plants or in flowers. Okay, that's all for this week. Thank you so much, and see you again next week for another summary video.